Well, hey all, and welcome back. I just got a new package from the Show-Z store. This is Flame Toys Fury Model Line RC. Now I'm going to go over a few things with this model kit as we go along, and even though I'm aware of the previous pitfalls from their Windblade model kit, I'll be able to go with this kit with you guys to show you any pitfalls or areas that you can improve on. The hope also is that since I got this from Show-Z store, if there is any flaws in the kit, I can go through them to get it taken care of, as Flame Toys doesn't really have the best customer service. Anyway, looking at the packaging, we have a very HD image on the front. Looks like it was made with the model kit, but maybe photoshopped over or a 3D render. It's kind of hard to say, but it's definitely not just a straight photograph. Even though still pretty visually interesting, we have the authentic Transformers logo here. And then on the back, we have some images of the model kit. Now, be known that this is likely not going to have any panel lining or anything like that, like you see in here. However, I will do some panel lining on this kit and give you an idea of what it looks like. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this built and see if it's worthy of our collection. And here you can see everything inside the box. Now here's the decals. Hopefully these are better than the Windblade ones. They were not die cut very well. There's the pre-painted face, some tires for the wheels, translucent parts. Then we have a series of gray components. We have a little bit of pink here with some white painted on it. And then we have some white pieces. Now the one thing I'll point out is that everything is very glossy. And that worked fine with Windblade because she was a nice black and it just kind of worked because they actually use a really nice black plastic. But for these other colors, I have a feeling we will need to dull coat them. Now here's RC straight built. And before we talk about the figure, let's talk about the build process itself. Nothing really stood out as being overly terrible. There's a typical issue I have with Flame Toys kits, and that is they require a lot of force to get some parts to fit together. They just don't have the finesse that you get with a Bandai kit, and all the pluses are very hard, so expect to have a little bit of force on your fingers as you find ways to get these to seal tightly without hurting yourself. The other notable thing is there's a handful of really terrible attachment points for the sprues of the runner. You can work with it, but one thing I suggest as you build this is that in addition to having a good pair of snips, you have some sandpaper to sand away any nubs left behind, because these actually were a little bit more difficult to trim. And for the ones that are in very tight areas that just aren't really well-placed sprues, you can use a file. But some people can use an X-Acto blade, which just be careful. Now let's get a quick 360 of RC looking here. This is straight built. The only thing that's been done to her is snap together. No decals applied, no paint, and no panel lining. Overall, it is a very nice looking design. Lots of places with molded detail that you can definitely bring out with some panel lining. The one thing to note is she does have a tampo of the Autobot logo on her chest, but that's about it. Let's go ahead and check out her accessories. We have an extra set of hands for gripping. In addition to those, we have the decals, which we will apply later. Talk about her gun real quick. So there's three versions of the gun. We have the base gun here, which is just a gray pistol. You could panel line it or add some sort of extra detail. Then there is a upgraded version that has a pink shell on it, and you have an attachment you can add that is sort of a blue energy blade. And then lastly, we can take this extra piece that snaps on the top. It's a little tricky to kind of figure out which way I want to put it, but I feel like, I mean, just snap it in there. I just want to be careful and not do any damage to the plastic. And then the blade moves to the outside, and you get a Energon type rifle. And then we have a visor. So the best way I found to do this is you can pull this up, which is actually a pretty cool feature, and there's probably a chance you could fit the visor underneath just by doing that, but I found it's better just to take that off, and you can just push that in there, and we take the headpiece and put it back, and we have this visor. Now, I really like this. I think it's very cool. There is something, I think in the earlier photos, I liked a little bit better. And I don't know if maybe an outline on it. I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. it just detracts from her eyes a little bit. I don't like as much as I think I did in the photos, but it still looks pretty good. Now, even though I knocked it off, I was going to take this off anyway. The backpack does come off. It just simply goes on there with friction. And just to talk about it while we have it here, is there's a couple points of articulation. We have one at the base here, we have one there, and then both pieces go there. This piece back here has a little bit of articulation as well because that can bend in. But that's pretty cool. There's lots of places for detail in here. My only gripe is when you look at the back, is that you don't see the wheel and you have sort of the white inside of the spoke. I think painting that gray to match the other plastic will make it be sufficient, but it is a little bit of area that could have probably been detailed up a little bit better. I'm going to leave this off for now so we can talk about other points of articulation, and what we have here is quite a bit. So we have wrist movement. The wrist design is actually kind of interesting when we compare her to Windblade. And we have a double elbow. Nice bend, very dynamic. We have a shoulder. Shoulders are very tight, but we have what I really like in here is this very cool butterfly joint that has all these extra moving parts. And then she has her shoulder in there as well with full rotation. And it actually has a secondary joint as well, so you can get that sort of really good pose. And I just knocked it off. That's one area I would probably really consider gluing. The only place it's held on are these 2 points, and that's it. I kind of was expecting them to go through these holes here, but they don't. So I would glue them where they connect to each other, which is a single peg. But I'll leave that off here for now as we talk about the rest articulation. The head has a bit here, as you saw when I put on the visor. It's just kind of cool where you have these mechanical parts that kind of move up. We have a double jointed neck at the base here and at the base of the head, so lots of positioning there. This piece of the chest can actually pop back off. It's not on there very tight. It's just friction held on, so I don't know why that was necessary, but just something to be aware of. Torso, we have a decent bit of articulation with a big joint in there, but this piece moves as well as that. The only gripe I really have about the final piece, she's very glossy. The gloss itself is not necessarily terrible. It just makes her feel like she just came straight off the assembly line. Not leather worn, not shaded. It looks fine, but that's just something to be aware of. Back to articulation, we have all that. What's really interesting is we have these hip areas that can be positioned as well as back here. These are all on their own joints. So that way, as you rotate the leg, you can sort of fold pieces around to make them look more cohesive and more like essentially its own pieces as you move them. It doesn't just have these big gaps and stuff left behind. You can definitely come up with some solid poses. Down on the hip, we have forward, back movement. Her butt does get in the way a little bit, so you can't go back too far unless you turn it out. But that's what's kind of cool is there's this double joint in here that allows this part to spin in addition to the hip joint itself, which can rotate outward and move forward and back. And then we have a double knee joint. Now this exposes a joint that I do find kind of weird. I don't know if there's a purpose for it, but something we'll explore here in a second. And see, ankle, we have actually a double joint. There's a base rotation here on this section, and then there is a shaft with 2 ball joints that go through here. So we definitely get lots of good articulation on the ankle. We have a toe joint, and then of course we can go forward and back. So lots of articulation, lots of really good articulation. The one weird part is the shin here. I don't understand the purpose of it. I think it looks really good this way, and it gives it just a little bit more bend, I guess. But when it's open, when this part here is open, it just looks like a model kit. Like there could have been better molded detail or something inside there to make it look like it's exposed mechanics. So that is a part I don't necessarily love. It could also be a weak part of the design because there's not a lot that actually holds this part in movement. So I would be definitely careful as you mess around with that. So, but that covers, you know, her accessories as well as articulation and sort of the base look of it. Now what I want to do is go ahead and apply some panel lining, and then we can see where this kit really shines with that little bit of extra effort. So let's get a look at RC now that she's panel lined. And for panel lining, I used gray for the white parts. I used black on the darker gray parts. However, I did use it on the 2 sections of the shin because I did not want to use those stickers. And then I used a brown on all the pink, just so it wasn't such a dark contrast. Now about the decals, these are better than the ones that were on Windblade. They are die cut properly, so they do come off, but they are very tiny, so you will need to use a razor blade or some tweezers to deal with them. They were fairly easy enough to apply by using the tweezers and a toothpick to sort of depress it, but they were small. I lost the belly button one, which I actually wasn't a fan of anyway, in between the seam line here, which is an unfortunate flaw between this figure and Windblade. And overall, the aesthetic is very good. There's actually a mix of different RCs in here. We have a little bit of, like, say, the feet. That's very reminiscent of the new Rise of the Beast RC. And then we have elements kind of pulled from IDW, as well as the original RC. And I feel like even the head gimmick kind of reminds me of RC from Animated, where they open up her head. And then, of course, it is overlaid with a anime girl cute vibe at the same time. So there's a big mix of things here, and I think they really pull together to make a very interesting look. And overall, I do like the look of this figure. Now let's go ahead and get her with Windblade. And the thing I wanted to show you all is that she is not just a recolor of this other figure. There are some certain mechanics here. The first thing I'll say is that she's much easier to make stand. Windblade was very difficult to get in a pose that I actually can get her stand up, which is why I normally have her in a kneeling position. But there is, of course, a height difference. There is shape differences, like in the midsection, the head, the face. The parts that do seem somewhat similar engineering are completely molded differently, so it's not just a one-to-one. Even the joint design is a bit different for the wrists and the elbows and things like that. It does share a little bit in sort of the torso area, as well as how the knees work and ankles and whatnot. But for those who were concerned that this was just a slight retool of the Windblade figure, this is something that is different enough to justify the purchase. And looking at it now that it's panel lined, I think it does look good enough, even without doing a dull coat on it, that it does fit in the shelf. I feel like the quality with the decals has improved. I feel like the one issue that I had where they were die cut improperly on Windblade, as you can see, she doesn't have a light blue sticker on the very top of her head. I'm going to have to paint that because that sticker was faulty from Flame Toys. Now, with that said, I got mine from Show Z Store, and going through them, I've always had lots of great luck if there's ever anything wrong with my stuff, where they can get me a replacement part fairly quickly. I've had a pretty high success rate with that, unless the company has just completely gone out of business. And speaking of Show Z Store, if you want to help out the channel, you can put in code NORITOY up at the top of Show Z's webpage, and when you make a purchase, it actually will help support the channel by showing that you get news from us. But with that said, let us know if this RC is worthy of your collection, like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time.